This is your headline news you might have missed, brought to you by the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and in some of the stories you might have overlooked in all the excitement over Ghazi and the State of the Union, Marco Rubio is taking steps to run for president in 2016. Those of you who may recall his Republican response to an earlier State of the Union will understand what I'm saying when we say I hope he's stocking up on bottled water for that adventure. In other big news this week, the King of Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah, passed away at the ripe old age of 90, turning the reins over to a new young generation of leadership. His brother Salman, who is nearly 80, will become the new King of Saudi Arabia. World leaders in the United States and elsewhere took time away from their efforts fighting a fanatical enemy that whips and terrorizes dissidents from its own religion and beheads them at times as well, in order to pay homage to a world leader who whipped and terrorized dissidents from his own religion when he was not beheading them as well. So King Abdullah, big story. Now, in a story that got overlooked, another study was done. Another data expert looked at the concept of mass surveillance from a statistical point of view, and without getting into the Bayes theorem and some of the other statistical theories used, he came up with a conclusion that many other freedom-loving peoples around the world have long ago reached, which is that mass surveillance is not an effective way to find terrorists. The principle is simple, and the principle is this. If the test for whether or not you're a terrorist is 99.999% effective, in a country like the United States, you will still come up with tens of thousands of false positives. That is, people who are not terrorists but are reported as such. They will lose their freedom. The country will waste its time pursuing the wrong people, and terrorists will still do what terrorists do. So mass surveillance, such as that which the NSA conducts, is not effective for catching terrorists. It may, however, be effective for other things that they would rather we not discuss, like finding people who don't agree with the political leadership of the party. But I don't want to talk like Alex Jones or one of the conspiracy theorists there. We don't know that that is the case. It may be a much simpler explanation, such as the fact that a lot of people are getting rich at this, a lot of people are getting powerful at this, and not too many people are worried about protecting the Constitution and catching the bad guys the most efficient way possible. Now, on that, before we change topics, Vox, the website started by Ezra Klein and some other journalists, reports that they got no threats for posting the Charlie Hebdo cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, but that they have received dozens for covering Islamophobia. That, to me, is an interesting underreported story, that here in this country, nobody threatened them for publishing cartoons mocking Islam or its prophet, but in fact, they received quite a few direct and indirect threats and extremely nasty, vile language, especially toward women writers, for reporting on the fact that there are people who hate Muslims. That is, to me, an interesting story. Now, I believe that Ghazi has gotten enough coverage, so we won't go into that too much here. I will say that in terms of other stories, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Jack Lew, says that the odds of a corporate tax overhaul are, quote, greater than 50-50. The Treasury Secretary says he is confident that the Obama administration will get a deal with Republicans in Congress to reform what he calls, quote, a dysfunctional business tax code. Now, he says there are a broad set of business tax reforms on which we should be able to agree. He proposes a dramatic lowering of the tax base in return for closing loopholes. You know how this one ends. The loopholes win. The people do not. We bear, and we remind you again that the tax rate actually paid by U.S. corporations is at or near historic lows, and their profits are at or near historic highs. Now, speaking of large American United States corporations, JPMorgan Chase, run by the once lionized Jamie Dimon, JPMorgan Chase, by some measurements, America's largest bank, which paid $20 billion 1 year in fines, where no senior executive has gone to jail, turns out may not just be fraudulent and criminally inclined in its behavior, but appears to be incompetent as well. In a seriously underreported story, it apparently filed the wrong paperwork when it took out a loan, made a loan rather to GM, making the loan unsecured rather than secured. Long story short, it will cost the bank potentially as much as $1.5 billion. JPMorgan Chase, not just venal, incompetent too, and yet its senior executives continue to collect their large paychecks. That is our news report for this week from the heart of the United States experience. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.